This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Hey, sweetie, how are you today? This is Isabel, and I'm your host for the Time to Care, the Caregivers podcast. Today, I want to talk about how to have difficult conversations. So, let's get started. Last week, I was talking about having taboo conversations, and while I was editing the audio, I noticed that I didn't tell you how to have a difficult conversation around taboos. So I need to talk about that today, and I want to give you advice on how to have these taboo conversations with your parents, with your loved ones, with your spouse, with your kids, with whoever you think you need to have a difficult conversation. Well, this is the time to learn about that. So, when I'm having a difficult conversation, first of all, I understand and I try to know as much as possible about the other person that I'll be talking about. For example, if I will be talking about my mom growing older or what she wants to do when she grows older or when she passes, I need to know what are her perspectives about that. And that is hard to know if the question or the topic has never been approached before. Maybe you might want to start understanding what their perspectives are by giving hypotheticals or by putting examples of other people, or I don't know, but that's a good way of like, hey mom, like this happened to my mom's friend, what do you think about? So you will start understanding what they think about certain topics, and if you understand their perspectives, it's going to be easier for you to approach this subject in a very constructive way. I learned how to do this when I was during my sustainability masters, and one of the things that we were taught, understanding what people want. If you were to negotiate in a business framework, some people want power, some people want money, some people want respect, some people want knowledge, they want to know how things are being made and done. So you need to understand that, like what is what the other people want in whatever conversation you want to have with them. And it's also important that you know what you want to achieve from that conversation. If you want to approach your parent about, you want to know if they have written a will or if they have a trust, etc., 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 then that is your objective about that. If you know that you want to know if it's being done, where it is, where you can find it, who's responsible for executing their wishes, etc., etc. But you also need to understand what they want, and maybe you want to understand what other people in that conversation might want from as an outcome from that conversation. Gather as much information as possible, and some would say that it's easier because it's our family and because we know them, and some others would say it's even harder because it's our family and we know how they are. Just bear in mind that and try to understand as much as possible about the other people. Journal about each one of the individuals and understand what they want, what they might want, or what they are expecting from any conversations. That is the first. The second part is preparing that conversation. If you come without knowing what you want to do, then chances are is that nothing is going to happen. If you don't prepare that conversation, it can go sideways and you might not achieve absolutely anything of what you wanted. So how do you plan for that? In the first place, you need to assure that you are in a neutral mode. So it's like driving a car. You you need to put in neutral. And I'm making fun of this because it's true. If you're very excited, very happy, very over the top, then you might not be considered serious, or I don't know. And if you're mad, if you're upset, if you want just to punch someone in the face, then you're going to end up fighting. And if you're afraid of the conversation, yes, you're going to be afraid of the conversation. It's part of it. But if you let the fear run all your emotions, then you're not going to have that conversation. So make sure that all your emotions are in place. And before having that conversation, make sure that you set your mind to be in neutral position, like in a car. Just set yourself, I don't know, go for a walk, meditate, whatever it is you do on a regular basis to set your mind, do that. And you also need to prepare the conversation in terms of what you want to achieve, and you need to practice. Maybe if you practice that conversation, if you stand in front of a mirror and practice how that conversation is going to start, then when you actually face your loved ones, you are going to be prepared, and you know exactly how to start that conversation. We don't know what the other person or persons are going to say or reply to us. Probably you don't know how the conversation is going to end, but you can know how that conversation is going to start. So it is very important that you start preparing that conversation. You write it down, you practice it in the mirror. For example, if you like the theater, if you like the ballet, music, any kind of performance, artists practice hours and hours and hours before any event. They practice so much. Once they get in front of the people, they know exactly what they do, and they don't let their fear of being in front of all these people freeze them. So that's exactly what you need to do. You need to practice until you have it ready and you can go in front of your loved one and have that taboo conversation that neither one of you want to have, maybe. And actually, I was reading that most seniors would love to open these conversations, but they're just afraid of how people are going to react. Chances are that your loved one is willing to have that conversation, but just doesn't know how to start. So if you start, that might be good for everybody. The final step is to have that conversation. Were you expecting step number 3 to be that? To have a conversation? Sorry about that. If you have already prepared your conversation, you can have it. It's easy. Well, it's not easy. Maybe you're afraid, maybe you don't know how to start, but you already practiced, you already described that conversation, you already wrote that how you're going to approach, and etc., etc. So once you have that conversation, you need to know when to walk away from it. As I mentioned before, we never know how the other people are going to reply. And for example, if you're talking with your siblings about your parents and you're trying to negotiate something, that can lead into a very heated conversation, and you don't want that. So make sure to know what is the threshold in which you are going to walk away. And when that threshold happens, make sure that you walk away. Don't let feelings of anger, fear, frustration escalate too much. Take breaks and continue the conversation whenever everybody's feeling calm again. And that is if the conversation doesn't go well. But you also need to remember that while having the conversation, you need to be honest, you need to be brave, and you need to be vulnerable. Those three. You need to be brave because this is a taboo conversation. This is a difficult conversation, an awkward conversation. And you don't know how exactly your loved one is going to reply to these conversations. So you need to be brave. And part of that bravery is just starting that conversation. And I know you can do it. I know you're brave enough to have this conversation. I trust you can do it. And I know you can. Because if you're listening to this podcast is because you're actually concerned about being better and giving better care to your parents. So if you're listening to this is because you actually care. So I know you're brave enough to have this conversation. That's how I know you can have these conversations. You need to be honest as well. If you're concerned about something, you can say it out loud what your concerns are. If you tell the other person exactly how you feel and you're honest about it, then they will reciprocate being honest with you as well. And I think that's a very important thing to have when having a difficult conversation or when having a taboo conversation, because you want people to be honest. You actually want to know what they're thinking and how you can help them. And finally, you need to be vulnerable. It doesn't mean that you're going to allow everybody to insult you or anything like that. No, you need to build boundaries about that if that's the case. And that's another conversation topic for another time. Being vulnerable means that you are the first in the room to say what is bothering you, what is hurting you, what is on your mind. And that is a very good thing to do. Because when you're vulnerable, you allow other people to be vulnerable as well. As human beings, we are wired to be part of a community, and we are really afraid of the community kicking us out from the community. Before civilizations were the way they are right now, people needed the community to survive. So we are wired to be in community and survive that way. So it is very, very important that you are vulnerable, because then everybody will be vulnerable as well, and they won't be afraid of opening up, and they will share their concerns, their secrets, or what is bothering them. This is all for today. Hope you found this 3 steps to have difficult conversations useful. I hope you're able to have that difficult conversation with your parents. If you are still finding difficulties in having these conversations with your loved ones, with your parents, your kids, your siblings, your spouse, or whoever else it is, you can contact me. I will leave my contact information on the notes. Thank you so much for joining us today. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review if you like this podcast. That will help other people like you find me, and that will help. Thank you so much, and hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.